Good morning, everybody. God is good. And all the time, you have been sitting for a very long time. Just stand for 1 minute and straighten yourselves before His Excellency addresses us. Tumsifu Maria, enyi wanawe, tutole salam, tumshangilie, salam, salam, salam Maria, salam, salam, salam Maria. Thank you. Please be seated. I have two apologies to make. First one, we apologize to His Excellency the Nuncio for keeping waiting for long. That was because good things were going on here. We also apologize for keeping you in the hall beyond the time for taking tea. But His Excellency is normally a man of very few words. I promise you, he won't be taking long to give his address. Now I have the honor and the privilege to introduce to you the Apostolic Nuncio to Kenya and to South Sudan. He handles both countries. A nuncio is the equivalent of ambassador. So he's the ambassador of the Holy Father in Kenya, and he also doubles up for South Sudan. And his name is His Excellency Archbishop Charles Daniel Balvo. Your Excellency, now I feel most welcome to address these great men and women who keep our Catholic identity going on in schools. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Here's my speech. See all that? But actually, here it is. So I'm not going to read 40 pages or 400 pages to you, especially since you have been listening so many different things and having a lot of words going out of mouth into ears. I am the firstborn in my family, and when I speak to my sisters, the youngest one is 16 years my junior, and I talk about the past, things that went on in my life, they always say to me, that's last century, that's even last millennium, when I start to talk about what it is that I was doing. And it has been 60 years since I started going to school. I was in, we call it first grade, Standard 1, in February 1957. And in those years, there were no preschool. Nowadays, children at 3, they go to 2 years preschool, and then at 5, they have kindergarten, then at 6, they go and have their Standard 1 or first year of school, first grade. When I started school, there was none of that. You started school, you were 5 and a half. Nowadays, when you're in the first grade, if you already don't know your letters, you don't know your numbers, maybe you can even read a little bit, you are handicapped. It's expected that by the time you are starting the first year, first standard year, you already have some knowledge of reading and numbers and things. We didn't. We started, you go in first day of school, that's when you start to learn all these different things. And I was born in Brooklyn, in the city of New York, and we went to the parish school, it's called St. Edmund, and the sisters who taught us were Dominican sisters. And then after that, my third year in school, 1959, we moved to about 50 kilometers away to a place where the school was called Sacred Heart. And oddly enough, it was the same order of sisters teaching there. They were Dominican sisters, but I never had the same sister twice. And in those years, the sister taught all the subjects. There was no separate math teacher, no separate language teacher, no separate social studies teacher. The one sister had to teach everything. we were little kids, so we probably didn't realize it. That sister probably had to keep one lesson ahead of the students to be able to, to do, she had to teach science, she had to teach spelling, she had to teach English, she had to teach math, arithmetic, and all the other subjects, because there were very few or no lay teachers at that time in the schools. They were all religious women. And maybe you had once a week a laywoman came in and did the music lesson and did the art lesson. And when I was 11 and I was in the 7th grade, the standard 7 is when we first started having physical education in Catholic schools in my area in the West. So then you had someone come in from outside, but we always had the religious sisters. Now I know you are a group of principals. The first principal that I had, the 3 years that I was in Brooklyn, I don't really remember. But when I went to the second school and we had Sister Mildred, and everyone was afraid of Sister Mildred because Sister Mildred was a disciplinarian. But when I was, I guess I must have been 10 or 11, I was a great enthusiast of space travel. 1961, you had the first launching of men into space. And I would, the US ones were televised, and I would watch these things. And one of these launches took place in 1962 or 1963, and I didn't want to miss watching it on television. So my mother said, well, why don't you ask the principal if you can bring the television into class, because it was a small portable TV. So I went to Sister Mildred, the fearful Sister Mildred, and I asked her, could I bring the TV into the class so that the whole class, we were 50 or so, could watch this thing? And she said yes. It was a reasonable request. I was an altar boy and I was a pretty good student. I don't know if I had a good reputation or something, that the sister, I was 11 or 12, the sister, so no reasonable request was rejected. And then my last year in primary school, Sister Mildred went and another sister came who was older, who I don't really remember. But then in secondary school, I went to the seminary high school, and we would call the principal a rector. But even there, we had one for the first 3 years. It was the time of the Second Vatican Council. A lot of changes were coming in. The principal of the rector was, Monsignor Green was an older man, and some of the changes were not so easy for us to really get around to accept. So in my last year, there was a younger priest, and there were new priests teaching on the faculty who had been recently ordained, and all these changes were taking place. And one of the things that I discovered and remember that even now, I finished primary school in 1964, 53 years ago. I still remember the names of all of the sisters who taught me. And in the secondary school, the seminary high school, I'd have to think about it, because then we did have separate teachers. I still remember the names of most of the teachers that I had, because the teachers had a very great influence in our life. The very first one I had, her name was Sister Eleanor. We had her for 2 years. She was present when I celebrated my first Mass as a priest back home in my parish in 1976. And then, when I finished high school, we had what's called a yearbook. And we dedicated the yearbook to one of our lay teachers in 1968. And just a few years ago, I went to do a baptism in a parish where my cousin lives. And the man came into the sacristy. And I looked at this man, and lo and behold, it was this same man, 45 years later, who was a parishioner, and I recognized him, and I said, oh yes, his name was Mr. Poley, Mr. William Poley. I said, oh, Mr. Poley, it is you. And he said, yes. He was older, as I was, too. As you can see, I'm not as young as I used to be. So, the influence that teachers have, your students, they remember you. They remember things you said, things you did. Teachers and your principals, you have a strong effect on the students who are entrusted to your care. And that's something very, very important to remember. Because, in fact, the principal in a school, now obviously I went to school in the United States, I see how schools, and I've visited some here in Kenya, but I'm sure, and to a certain extent, the role and the function is the same, that for us in the church there are various points that are points of unity. The Holy Father is the person, the point of unity for the whole church. The bishop is the point of unity in the diocese. The parish priest is the point of unity in the parish, in the mission. But in the school, you are the one who is the point of unity, the principal. Everyone is looking to you for guidance. Everyone is looking for you to set the tone. When I was in the seminary, I sang in the choir. I like to sing. And at one point, we were not paying attention. This is when I was in the theology, the major seminary. And we were having our practice, and we are all men, so of course you have first tenor, second tenor, first bass, second bass. You don't have, as in a choir, soprano and alto and tenor and bass. I was a second bass, I sing down here. But we were not paying attention to the choir director, and then he just went like this. And although each of us can sing, we need the guidance, we need the director. When you see an orchestra, you see all these, even these great big orchestras with 100 instruments, each one is concentrating on his or her own music and instrument. You see the choirs, all the choirs at the masses that we attend. Everyone is singing, looking at the music, singing the harmony that they're supposed to be singing, but they're paying attention to the conductor. Because the conductor is the one who is holding it together, leading with the rhythm, the speed, who is to be singing stronger, who is to be singing weaker, all the different changes in the choir, all the different changes in any kind of an orchestra. And if the conductor is not there, then we don't know how to coordinate, we don't know how to keep it together. And that's what a principal is supposed to be. The principal in the school is the focal point of unity for everyone. The teachers, the students especially, the other staff members, so that the way in which the principals in the school carry out the mission that is entrusted to them is very, very important, because you know you are the point of unity, which often is changing your behavior, because you know that everyone is looking at you. Everyone is depending on you to set the tone in the school. And in a Catholic school, one of the ways that you set the tone, of course, is through your own faith. That it's not merely a profession, you are an educator, you have so many degrees, you have so many years of experience, but you also have a faith experience. When I was in primary school, sometimes the sister would put down all of the books, and she would take out a Life of the Saints, or something like that, and read to us. And although I was no longer a small child, I liked the sound of the voice, of the sister's voice, just sitting and listening, and she would read to us lives of saints. The Dominican sisters, the congregation, or that they belonged to, they had missions. They were missions in Asia. So she would speak to us about their experience. She would share with us the experience of her faith, the faith of the community to which she belonged. And that's an important part of your own experience as principals. Because in a Catholic school, you're not just teaching the subjects, the math and the science and the language arts and all these things. You're also teaching the faith. And our faith is not taught merely by, oops, this is going down, not merely by whatever is written in a book. It's what is your faith experience. How is the life, how is the person of Jesus Christ important in your life? And this is something that you share with your students, and this is what your students are going to remember a lot more than any particular lesson that you're going to teach them about a language or the history of a place. They're going to remember you as a person, and the way in which you lived, the way in which you lived your faith. A second thing that's very important, in addition to unity, is something called patience. You have been patient this morning, listening to lots of talks. I am also, as Bishop Muhatia mentioned, I'm the nuncio to South Sudan. In March, the bishop in the Diocese of Wau was in Europe, and his health was not good, and he died. And they brought the body back to Juba, and then it was flown up to Wau, which is about an hour and a half flight from Juba, in one of these really old Russian combination passenger and cargo plane. No windows, you can't see anything, you can only tell whether you're landing or taking off by how the plane feels. And then 2 days before we went to one of these planes crashed and burned to a crisp, but fortunately everyone got off the plane. So when we landed, there you could see it, the burned out remnants of this plane was right there. And we got off the plane and they brought the casket of the bishop, and then we had to bring it to the cathedral for a mass. And we were several of us, the bishops, priests, the government, we were all in vehicles. But in front of us were pilgrims walking. So it took 2 hours to go from the airport to the cathedral because people were walking in front. You couldn't go any faster. So what do? You can complain for 2 hours, or you talk to the people. You listen to the bishop. They were in recordings of the bishop on the radio, some in English but mostly in Arabic, and the people in the car were translating for me. And there were all sorts of children going up to the side of the car because I'm obviously different from the other people that are around them. So they were all waving and saying hello. You could easily lose your patience, but the best thing to do is remember that this is an event, an important event, and you remain patient and you learn patience. It's one of the things that you need to have as a principle. One of the few things that I have written down on this is one of the great educators in our Catholic tradition is St. John Bosco. And he wrote this about his relationship with the boys, which are the first ones they were taking in, about that. First of all, if we wish to appear concerned about the true happiness of our foster children, and if we would move them to fulfill their duties, you must never forget that you are taking the place of the parents of these beloved young people. I have always labored lovingly for them and carried out my priestly duties with me. My sons, meaning the Salesian priests and brothers, in my long experience, very often I had to be very convinced of this great truth. It is easier to become angry than to restrain oneself, and to threaten a boy than to persuade him. Yes, indeed, it is more fitting to be persistent in punishing your own impatience and pride than to correct the boys. We must be firm but kind, and be patient with them. I give you as a model of charity I give you as a model the charity of St. Paul, which he showed to his new converts. They often reduced him to tears and entreaties when he found them lacking docility or even opposing his loving efforts. See that no one finds you motivated by impetuosity or willfulness. It is difficult to keep calm when administering punishment, but this must be done if we are to keep ourselves from showing off our authority or spilling out our anger. Let us regard these boys over whom we have some authority as our own sons. Let us place ourselves in their service. Let us be ashamed to assume an attitude of superiority. Let us not rule over them, except for the purpose of serving them better. This was the method that Jesus used with the apostles. He put up with their ignorance and roughness and even their infidelity. He treated sinners with a kindness and affection that caused some to be shocked, others to be scandalized, and still others to hope for God's mercy. And so he bade us to be gentle and humble of heart. They, the boys, are our sons, and so in correcting their mistakes we must lay aside all anger and restrain it so firmly that it is extinguished entirely. There must be no hostility in our minds, no contempt in our eyes, no insult on our lips. We must use mercy for the present and have hope for the future, as is fitting for true fathers who are eager for real correction and for improvement. One of the theme of the conference is integrity, and I think these are two things that are important for that integrity: unity and patience. And I would like to, it's not exactly concluding, but to just read a few things, remarks of Pope Francis to students and to teachers, one that he gave in June of 2013. Do not be disheartened in the face of the difficulties that the educational challenge presents. Educating is not a profession, but an attitude, a way of being. In order to educate, it is necessary to step out of ourselves and be among young people, to accompany them in the stages of their growth, and to set ourselves beside them. Give them hope and optimism for their journey in the world. Teach them to see the beauty and goodness of creation and of men and women who always retain the Creator's hallmark. But above all, with your life, be witnesses of what you communicate. Educators pass on knowledge and values with their words, but their words will have an incisive effect on children and young people if they are accompanied by their witness, their consistent way of life. Without consistency, it is impossible to educate. Thus, collaboration in a spirit of unity and community among the various educators is essential and must be fostered and encouraged. School can and must be a catalyst. It must be a place of encounter and convergence of the entire educated community, with the sole objective of training and helping to develop mature people who are simple, competent, and honest, and who know how to love with faithfulness, who can live life as a response to God's call, and their future profession as a service to society. The main element at school is to learn to be magnanimous, magnanimity, this virtue of the great and the small, which always makes us look at the horizon. What does being magnanimous mean? It means having a great heart, having greatness of mind. It means having great ideals, the wish to do great things to respond to what God asks of us. Hence, also for this very reason, to do well the routine things of every day and all the daily actions, tasks, meetings with people, doing the little everyday things with a great heart open to God and to others. It is therefore important to cultivate human formation with a view to magnanimity. School does not only broaden your intellectual dimension, but also your human one. Catholic schools take special care to develop human virtues, loyalty, respect, faithfulness, and dedication. Teaching is a beautiful profession because it allows us to see the people who are entrusted to our care grow day after day. It is a little like being parents, which many of you are also as well, at least spiritually. It is a great responsibility. Teaching is a serious commitment that only a mature and well-balanced person can undertake. Such a commitment can be intimidating. There are many challenges. But remember that no teacher is ever alone. They always share their work with other colleagues and the entire educational community to which they belong. Young people need a positive reference point in their school. The school can be this or become that and become this only if it has teachers capable of giving meaning to school, to studies, and to culture without reducing everything to the mere transmission of technical knowledge. Instead, they must aim to build an educational relationship with each student, who must feel accepted and loved for who he or she is, with all of her limits, his or her limitations and potential. So that your task is more necessary now than ever. You must not only teach content, but the values and customs of life. These are the things that you must pass on. A computer can teach content, but to understand how to love, to understand values and customs which create harmony in society, this takes a good teacher. May the Holy Spirit inspire and accompany us, for he has summoned us, invited us, given the opportunity and the duty to offer the best of ourselves. He is the same Spirit who on the first day of creation moved over the waters, ready to transform them, ready to bestow life. He is the same Spirit who gave the disciples the power of Pentecost. The Spirit does not abandon us. He becomes one with us, so that we can encounter paths of new life. May He, the Spirit, always be our companion and our teacher along the way of life. So thanks for your patience in listening to these few words.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I know there's going to be a vote of thanks, but many of us have grown up or have lived during the Nyayo days. So let's give His Excellency a Nyayo clap. Okay. Moja, mbili, tatu. Thank you. You are really Nyayo men and women.
Standing back, we are very happy. Send our greetings to the Holy Father. If you're talking to him tonight,